Okay, it's my pleasure to introduce Paul Strobis. And Paul directs Broward County Transit's fleet and has been an early adopter of propane autogas, and his fleet is now running dozens and dozens and dozens of propane vehicles in his fleet. I'm going to let Paul introduce himself and talk to you about his fleet. I know he's got a short presentation. He knows a lot about this topic, and I think you're going to enjoy what he knows. And then afterwards, my hope is that we have the ability to ask Paul questions and benefit from his experience and knowledge, and hopefully take away a lot of new information. And as Elizabeth mentioned, our kind of objective here is to sort of inspire a potential project here in North Florida, and would love to support you beginning today in making that happen. So with that, Paul, thanks again for sharing today, and we look forward to hearing what you have to say.
No, my pleasure. And thank you for inviting me to speak. So for everybody, I'm Paul Strobis. I'm the Director of Paratransit Services in Broward County. I've been in the transportation industry now for a little over 21 years. Started in Boston, Massachusetts. Had enough of the snow up there. So about 11 years ago, I came down to South Florida to take over the reins here. As Ben mentioned, we've been running propane vehicles in our paratransit fleet since 2015. And so I've got some slides that I put up on the screen just to talk about some of the factors that you want to consider if it's something you're thinking to implement in your operations. Some of the things that I learned rolling it out, and hopefully that'll help you guys. And then some resources that'll make it easier for you to roll it out. So, and then I'll be happy to answer any questions afterwards that you may have. So can I share? All right, we have the presentation, or did I share the wrong screen?
We're seeing your version of the screen.
How about now?
That looks good.
All right. All right. So, what I tell people when I've done some presentations council, and the things that you need to know are the vehicle types that you're going to operate. The good news is no matter what you operate, there's probably a solution for propane for you, and that's whether you're using larger cutaways or even smaller sedans. There's OEM systems that you can have put on the vehicle. There's aftermarket solutions. Fears and misconceptions. A lot of people are going to question the use of propane as a fuel source, although I think it is better now than it was years ago. But I had to deal with a lot of biases in recommending this fuel source. They just think it's that stuff we cook our grill with, and the things they see blow up in Hollywood movies. So a lot of fears and misconceptions on propane. Understanding your fuel infrastructure needs. For me, it was the chicken before the egg. There's not a lot of fueling locations for propane. So how do you build an infrastructure that meets your fleet needs? And depending on your mileage driven daily, working with a partner in the industry, there's ways to do that without a lot of capital outlay for you. Knowing the benefits to the environment, one of the things for my commission when I went to it, this was one of their main resiliency efforts, knowing that we're a tourism location, people want to come down for our beaches. And so anything we can do to, clean the environment was a benefit to them. So they embraced that open-armed when I brought the project forward. And then, the biggest things, the budget impact. Both from a capital outlay and operating. Propane is the lowest cost fuel source that you can operate in a vehicle. And I'll illustrate that for you all. So here's an example of my fleet currently. I started off with Ford E450s. And hopefully you're all familiar with the Florida FDOT TRIPS contract that you could piggyback off of. If you're applying for 5310 grant funds or 5311 grant funds, you have to buy off the TRIPS contract with those vehicles with FDOT for your region. As a transit agency, you're allowed to piggyback off them. So I've been using their solicitation to buy my vehicles for years. So we went with the E450 from Creative Bus Sales, and that came with an OEM Roush Clean Tech propane system on the vehicle when it got here. So again, education, this came with a 41 usable gallon tank at the time. And so I had a limited range of about 225 miles for the bus. Working with the partners, Roush now can sell you a 65 gallon tank on that vehicle, and you can get well over 340 miles range on that bus. And the upfit cost from the vehicle was $17,000 for the propane injection system in the vehicle. Now I'm getting about 5 miles a gallon on that engine. And so as technology improved, we decided to go smaller versus bigger. And while I love my friends at Roush, they really don't have a solution for anything smaller than an E350, 450 body style. They don't work with Chevy. They're a Ford OEM. And so we had to find another alternative. And on the FDOT contract, ICOM North America is a secondary installer that you can have. And on the bottom left, you'll see I've got Ford Transit Cutaways that I've been buying from Collins. Their upfit price is 16 grand on the state contract. Well, I felt that was a little pricey. The reason why is I had added some Ford Tauruses to my fleet that I bought off the state contract for sheriff departments, just to add some rubber on the road for me. And I was able to get ICOM through a bid process, and I'm paying less than 8 grand a unit. And it's the exact same system that would be put on the Ford Transit. So instead of paying the upfit on the FDOT contract, I ended up just bidding directly with ICOM, and I'm putting that same system in my Transits for 8 grand a piece. So just because it's available on the FDOT contract, you don't necessarily have to buy it through the FDOT contract. You might be able to get a better price on your own. And then I've got some MV1s that are gasoline engines. And we could convert those if we choose to, but because of the age of them, I chose not to. So as these retire away, they'll be replaced with propane vehicles. So right now I've got a fleet of 337 vehicles. 278 of them are running propane, and my MV1s are the only ones that are still gasoline. So the fears and misconceptions, the first one was it was unsafe. Again, as I said, it's blows up, it's dangerous. And so using the resources with like the Propane Research Education Council, just online, you come across that propane is actually a very safe fuel source. It has a narrower range of flammability compared to other petroleum products, higher ignition point than gasoline. They think, what about when it leaks? It doesn't. It dissipates into the air. The equipment that they put in these buses are almost bulletproof. The tanks are so strong compared to what comes stock from Ford for a gasoline tank. Really safe. And with the injection system, it's pressurized. So when it pushes the fuel into the engine to run it, when you shut the engine off, it pulls it all back to the tank. So a lot of safety systems are in place for this. And what I tell everybody now is, if they let school buses operate on propane, they would never be able to do that if it wasn't safe. So here in Broward, we've got over 200 school buses running propane as well through Bluebird. And so if they're going to let you do that, and there isn't a higher insurance rate for a propane bus, you know that it's going to be okay. So, I got people to say, yep, let's do it. This guy seems to know what he's talking about. And then I had this happen. 2 weeks before go live in 2014, we were going to run these propane buses out on the road January 1st, 2015. And I had a massive vehicle fire, and my boss was ready to fire me, grounded the whole fleet. And so we had to have a national forensic fire expert come in, and Ford was here and Roush was here. This had nothing to do with propane. This was a electrical fire in the engine area, but the fire department, because of the fears, knowing that it was a propane bus, just let it burn and didn't try to put it out. They just got away from it. And so, you know, again, that fears and misconceptions was part of it. I will tell you that everything that the Roush system was supposed to do happened. The fuel retreated back to the tank, and there was still, I got underneath this vehicle after the fire, and there was still 3/4 of a tank of propane in it. It never ignited. Everything you see here was from the electrical fire alone. So all of the safety features, and so we got permission, you know, from my boss to put them back out on the road. And we've not had an issue with any of the fuel systems in the 7.5 years I've been running these things. Infrastructure. Propane is a very mobile fueling infrastructure compared to some of the other fuel sources that you might decide. You know, I looked at CNG, I looked at, you know, gasoline and diesel. The one thing that I like about this is in the paratransit world, I contract out my service with private entities. And so if you look at the picture of the tanks, these are on skids. I can just pick them up and move them if I need to. Very, very portable. And the fueling is portable. The bobtail up in the top left-hand corner from my partner, AmeriGas, allows for mobile fueling. So we've had vehicles where the driver didn't pay attention to the fuel gauge and ran out of fuel, and we're able to dispatch out a bobtail and fill it up on the road and keep going without having to tow it. And in my agreement with AmeriGas has some of those emergency provision of services for me, so that I don't have to necessarily tow the vehicles. The dispensers, the tanks, all of these things, I didn't pay a dime in capital outlay for any of it. I built 2 fueling stations at each of my garages with 2 dispensers and 2 1,990 gallon tanks. That rolls into a unit price. So for every gallon of propane I purchase, there's a set markup with AmeriGas, and they're responsible for any maintenance on these things for me. So well worth negotiating that in any agreement with your propane provider, whether it's AmeriGas, Suburban, whoever's out, Blossman. They'll all be willing to do that. They'll calculate your usage and develop a system that will work for you. Additionally, these systems can tie into fuel management systems. We chose not to tie into our Fuel Master system because, again, these are sitting out on my vendor sites versus a county site, but it comes with its own system. Superior Engineering is the tank manufacturer, the dispenser. They have a fuel management system. This is a screenshot down the bottom of vehicle by vehicle. Each vehicle gets a fob that you see there, and you can track your fueling by bus, by location. You can set it up that tanks at different locations are identified properly, tracking your odometer as part of the entry, so that you can track by bus. We use the new knobbly connectors. These are not like the old ones where you had to screw them on, and the face mask and the gloves. Very safe, slide and click, pop off, no blowback. Anybody can do it with minimal. It's like a 5-minute training. Matter of fact, the dispenser has the training video on the screen that they can watch. So very, very robust infrastructure system. So when I started out with a tethered system at my garages. So the vehicles fueled up and left for the day. But as we've grown over the 7 years, we've gone ahead and started to expand. And so we're up to 4 stations now going in to allow for midday fuel ups if need be, or growth. Not just my paratransit system, but we have a 18 city municipality community bus program. We've started to roll out propane into those programs. So we wanted to put fueling stations closer to some of these cities that they would be able to go and fuel up as well. And then my partner, AmeriGas, has also got facilities where they've got retail dispensers, and my fobs work with their systems. So the two green circles are their facilities, and we can pull up to their facility, fuel up, and it goes right onto my bill, just like I was, buying it bulk. So a very convenient system for us to use their equipment as well as my own as part of the overall project. Obviously, they talk about the benefits to our environment. Knowing some of those facts help, especially your environmental folks. Propane is still derived from a fossil fuel, but it's getting cleaner. I've started the process of talking with AmeriGas of moving to renewable propane. It's also known as bio LPG. It's the same chemical identification, C3H8, as propane. So to work with all of your existing equipment and infrastructure, the vehicles, but it has an 80% lower carbon footprint than conventional propane that I'm using today. And it's these plants where they're collecting manure and methane and they're building it in a lab, but it's going to be so much cleaner than even what we're doing today. And I don't have to change any of my equipment out to start using it. So we've started that conversation now. And if you're interested, I would strongly recommend you start looking at that as well from the get-go as a potential source of fuel. Just an example of a bus. So, using an average of 5.9 miles a gallon, range, 250,000 mile life vehicle, the emissions savings is approximately 133,000 pounds of CO2 you're saving in the atmosphere. And when I calculate that across my entire fleet over the life of the vehicle, it's almost 18.5 million pounds of CO2 over that 5-year life of a vehicle. So it can make a difference quickly. And like I said, if I can get into the renewable, that number is going to be even larger. So very good for the environment. And then there's cost. This is a new slide I built just for you guys today. The current propane price for the industry is on the left. This is the BPN magazine that I use as my rack price. I pay on a weekly basis with AmeriGas. And so each week, this magazine comes out with what the rack price is across the country. We use the Mont Belvieu price. I'm sorry, I use the Hattiesburg price in this contract for my price. So it's $1.57 per gallon. And my markup with AmeriGas is about 45 cents per gallon. Again, that handles all trucking, deliveries, maintenance of my fueling locations. All of that is all included in that 1 per gallon markup. And so I'm paying today $2.03 this week for propane. And according to AAA gas prices, 403, 402 is the average for our region here in South Florida for gasoline. So you can see the difference in the price for today. So the impact of that long term is pretty dramatic. Here's a summary since the day I started propane of gallons consumed by year. Since 2015, we've consumed over 8.5 million gallons of propane at an average cost of $1.28 per gallon. Taking the gasoline equivalent, there's about a 15% efficiency difference in gasoline to propane because it burns hotter and cleaner. So the equivalent of that, I would have only had to buy 7.2 million gallons of gasoline for the same vehicles. But the gas buddy average of South Florida was $2.39 a gallon. So you can see over these 7 years, I've saved $6.3 million solely on the unit price of propane in my operating budget. When you apply for the annual alternative fuel tax credit, which the federal government continues to reauthorize annually, and we're hoping for this to be pushed out multiple years. Out of that $10.8 million, I've gotten back $3.4 million in revenue for using this alternative fuel, which has created net cost of only 87 cents a gallon. So $9.8 million savings over the last 7 years from my operation. So again, no capital outlay on my fuel infrastructure, and my operating savings of $9.8 million just on the fuel alone has been a significant advantage for me budgetarily over the last couple of years to provide more service without having to increase my operating budget through the use of this fuel. So it's been well received, and we've gotten a lot of accolades for it, and it's only going to get better as it continues on. And again, I go back to the lowest cost of ownership for a fuel source. I'm getting pushed a lot locally here for electrification, things like that. There are studies that show out there that the cost of electrifying your vehicles is significant. And when you look at the total life of the fuel source, mining the lithium for the batteries, the electric grid that it's coming from to charge your vehicles, there's studies that PERC has on their website that show that renewable propane has a lower carbon footprint than an electric vehicle when you look at the total energy cycle of the fuel source, not just the tailpipe emission. And so having some of those facts also can benefit you when you present this type of project for the people that make the decisions, that this is the lowest cost per vehicle that you can run. So those are my slides. Want to get through them quick, and then we can get into our discussion and try to answer if anybody's got any questions.
That was an awesome presentation, Paul. Thank you so much. I certainly have questions, but I'm not the guy who really needs to ask them. I wonder if any of our fleet partners on the phone would like to start with the questions. But if you're being shy, I'll start it off.
I would say start off then.
Curious about how did you select? Sounds like AmeriGas is your partner for fueling and infrastructure. How did you decide on that company? I mean, did you go through a process of competitive bid? How did it work?
Yeah, so anything that we do is done through a competitive bid. Unfortunately, I don't get the power to just pick who I want. Any of them can do this. Blossman, Suburban, AmeriGas. There's plenty of them out there that can partner with you. The one thing that I would recommend that I did was I required whoever it was to have a minimum gallon of storage in my county. And so with AmeriGas, when I put the bid out, I required a minimum of 200,000 gallons of propane within the county borders. And the reason why I did that was to avoid any potential transportation issues with getting fuel during a hurricane season. That's what I was concerned about, that if the fuel couldn't get from the port to their facility, 200,000 gallons would be suffice for me to get, I was averaging about 100,000 gallons a month early on. And so, we had a guaranteed usage clause in there that we would get priority fueling over anybody else. And they had over 350,000 local gallons in Broward County. So much so that it did make an impact. And I apologize. I don't remember the name of the storm. I don't remember. It was Dorian. One of them, it was the Cat 5 that was coming that destroyed the Bahamas. And there wasn't a gallon of gasoline anywhere to be found in Broward County. And we actually had to park our MV1s because we didn't have any gasoline for them. And we did all of our evacuations solely on propane. And, that was a caveat actually that my commission made a big deal of after the storm, because a lot of our fleet vehicles didn't have fuel. And so we were using paratransit vehicles that had propane in for supervisor vehicles and things like that. So having that local storage is key. And that's why AmeriGas has been my partner for so long. The other vendors just couldn't meet that particular criteria.
For those of you who are being shy, you can always chat me a question anonymously, and I'll be happy to ask it for you.
I do not bite.
Yeah. I wanted to ask Paul, in terms of the actual vehicles, have you retrofit any of the vehicles, or you buy them new as propane vehicles?
No. So I have purchased the original order of the Ford E450s. I bought with the Roush system installed on it when it got delivered by Champion Bus. The other vehicles, the Ford Tauruses, I bought those gasoline, had them delivered here, and then they were retrofitted after the fact. After they arrived with ICOM directly. I have a contract with ICOM North America that I ran a competitive bid, and they won that. And again, to talk about that real quick, there's only a few players in the game for propane, Roush being one of them. And as I mentioned, Roush really concentrates more on the bigger size engines in the E350 and up, 450, 550, 650. They've moved now towards school bus systems. ICOM is got systems that will fit any make and model. Ford, Chevy, Dodge, you name it, they can put a system in it. They have a liquid injection aftermarket system. There's other systems out there that are vapor injection. I would caution, if you put out a bid for a propane system, to call out that you want a liquid injection system. Your engines are designed for liquid injection, not vapor injection. And so to avoid any potential issues, again, I'm not trying to speak badly about a product. They'll tell you their product works great. But personally, I wanted, knowing how engines are designed, I'm going to stick with a liquid injection system for my engines. So, and again, ICOM comes out, all my Collins buses that are on the Ford Transit cutaways, they come out with the tank gasoline system installed. ICOM takes that system off and puts their system in its place.
And these are all new vehicles, not you haven't done that on used vehicles that you have in your fleet?
No, I haven't done it on used vehicles. The MV1s we talked about doing. When I awarded the contract to ICOM, my average mileage on the MV1s was about 85,000 miles. And you're only driving them for 5 years, roughly. And so I just decided that the return on investment for the $7,400 conversion just wasn't worth it. So, but we could have. ICOM could have put a system on it for us, but we just decided not to pull the trigger on that vehicle.
The average is on those kits are like $8,000, you said?
My direct contracted price, right? It's just shy of $8,000 a unit installed. Mm-hmm. Where when you buy the same system on the state contract, it's been upcharged a bit, and it's almost twice the cost.
Ooh, okay. We have a presentation last year on the troopers, and they did a conversion. You know, the company that assists drivers in the interstate when they get stranded, and they I think that they retrofitted their vehicles. I don't think that they were new. Ben, do you know if they were new?
I believe they did retrofits, you're right.
Yeah, they retrofit and successfully. He's very happy with their conversion and
Yep.
how much they're saving and how practical it is in emergencies. You know, when there's hurricanes and stuff. He's
Yep.
very happy with that. That's what I was asking. I didn't know if it was different for paratransit, if it will be different.
We're going to be retrofitting. The community bus program that I mentioned earlier is a municipality program where we do circulator buses in some of the cities in Broward County.
Mhm.
And so we bought a bunch of vehicles about a year ago. They come with the Ford 6.8 liter engine in the E450 chassis, but instead of buying them with propane systems, they came gasoline. And
Okay.
so we just re-awarded a new contract to ICOM last month. And so we included those vehicles, and they're all about 50,000 miles right now
Mhm.
on average. They're all going to be retrofitted to propane from the gasoline that they've been running on for the past year.
Mhm.
Paul, are there any complications or lessons learned regarding the funding sources for these vehicles when you're adding propane to the mix?
No, you know, it's an item. If you're using the TRIPS contract for FDOT, it's right on there as an option. You just choose what body you want. You choose the fuel source. It's just like, you know, okay, I want 8 seats. I want this. You just check it off. So it's a pre-built option for you. You don't have to negotiate it if you don't want to. I opt not to do it and install it after it gets here. And I had a conversation with my bus manufacturer very bluntly. You know, I'm not going to pay 16 grand for the same system when I can get it for 8. And,
Okay.
you know, ICOM's going to support the warranty on the engine in their system. So it doesn't necessarily affect the coverage that's in place on the TRIPS contract,
Mhm.
where your Creative Bus or Florida Transportation Systems are responsible for all the other warranty items when you get the vehicle.
Are these savings that you are realizing helping you to buy the next vehicles, or because I see in your graphic you're realizing huge savings on by using propane.
Oh yeah, no, I mean, it's like I said, you know, the push for electrification, it has been big from the politicians here in Broward. They want to go electric. We're rolling out electric buses on our fixed route side, but I've been able to educate them with some of these numbers and understanding the business model that Paratransit is. It's really not designed for electric vehicles yet because of the stop and go, because of the charging limitations of where you can have the fact that we contract out. You got to have enough electrification charging that if you put it in a vendor's property, now they've got an advantage. You can't ever have another competitive bid because they'll have, unless you're going to be able to move it. And I can't imagine what the cost is of trying to move charging systems from vendor location to vendor location. So, you know, we've been able to say, look, the industry just isn't there yet for paratransit. Propane's the best way to go. And so we're committed to be 100% propane moving forward until something better comes out. But like I said, once I'm in the renewable world, I can argue that it's almost cleaner than some of the electric vehicles on the road. So
On that topic of renewable propane or bio LPG, you know, we had a session a few weeks ago with one of your fleet colleagues down here who runs the fleet, the city furniture fleet, and he runs it on CNG, and he's actually procuring renewable natural gas in his fleet already. So RNG, renewable natural gas, is on the scene, And it seems like the industry is really gearing up in that area. And I know that some folks here are starting to think about using it in their fleets. What's AmeriGas telling you about the time frame, the schedule for renewable propane becoming available to you?
Within 60 days.
Wow.
They just agreed. They put out a press release, matter of fact, 2 weeks ago, that they're partnering with a new facility that's going to put out 13 million gallons of renewable propane in the first year of operation. And so, being one of the largest AmeriGas customers in the United States for public transit autogas fuel, they're reaching out to me about running a pilot, at least at the beginning, just to ensure that the performance is the same. But everything I've read tells me that it should be fine. My vendor ICOM isn't worried about it working with their injection system. AmeriGas knows that the tank and dispensers, it'll be seamless as well. So, the only thing I would see is probably it'll be a little more expensive because it's not as plentiful of a source yet. And there's a little more going into the manufacturing of the fuel source versus it coming from the process that the fossil version does. So there'll probably be some uptick in unit price, but I think people here would be willing to pay that for the additional environmental savings that we can implement.
Paul, this is Mike up in Nassau. Kind of curious about your experience with maintenance and repair costs. We looked at this, we looked at converting our rather small fleet, most of it anyway, to propane a couple of years ago before the pandemic occurred. Kind of knocked us off the rails. But one of the things we were concerned about would be at that time was repair and maintenance. We were told that propane would have the use of propane would have less of a burden. I don't know how to say it. Burden on the gasoline on an engine. That would it would run better. Engine would run better. It would run longer, and we'd have less wear and tear and those kinds of things. Has that been your experience? Or
it is. There's less carbon scoring on the engine because it does burn cleaner. It's burning hotter. Of course, you can't ignore the other issues with your combustible engine. And so, I've had engines blow up, overheat and burn out because, the idiot lights were ignored by maintenance. And we've actually been able to go in and there was a little bit of a finger pointing on a couple of engines that went bad. Oh, it's the propane. It's, no, it's Ford. And when you bring out the logs, it shows, oh, well, you ran it with the check engine light on for 40,000 miles. Well, guess what? There's something else that was the cause. We still run our PMs at the same intervals, the 6,000, 12,000, 18,000. We don't change that for that, but we have seen, the oil's cleaner when it's coming out for changes. If you maintain it well, they will run longer. I've got vehicles on the road right now in those E450s with the Roush system that are pushing 400,000 miles, and they're still running like champs. I've retired some that I probably could, I hit that 250 number, and that's what my planning cycle was, because this was the first retirement, but I probably could have got another 2-3 years out of those vehicles. The body would have rotted before the engine did on some of these things. So, they tell you that you can get lower maintenance costs. For me, I would say they're probably somewhat similar, only because we haven't changed our maintenance cycles to stay with the Ford manufacturing recommendations. So I've heard people that don't fall under FTA review or any of those other things on PM oversight. And so truckers that are running propane, they're doing oil changes like 15 to 20,000 miles. You know, it's all highway propane, but I mean, they're able to really push those things out just because of the cleanliness of the fuel source. The one thing you got to be careful of when you do build it, you got to make sure you got the right filters in your dispensers, so you're not getting any particulates in your tanks. Change your fuel filters often, you know, as recommended by ICOM or Roush. Roush has made some modifications to their system. One headache that I had with the original Roush system was you had to drop the tank every time you wanted to change the filter because it was on the inside. And so, you know, you had to bleed the tank. And so not to lose the propane, you had to go out and invest in a bleeder, pull the propane out, keep it compressed so you could put it back in after you did the PM. That was a bit of a headache in that first 138 buses I bought, but that system's been renovated based on our feedback. They've re-engineered that, so it's not the same anymore if you were to buy a system today. ICOM has their system on the exterior of the tank, so you don't have that problem. So the things that I've experienced, you probably wouldn't because of just those changes in the engineering.
Sticking on that maintenance question, Paul, some of us are familiar with the kind of one of the hidden costs of compressed natural gas, and that is that your maintenance facilities may have to be upgraded to meet code and requirements for ventilation and safety.
Which
and
don't exist in propane.
I was just going to ask you if you
There
had
are
to
there are no changes that were required to the garage area to deal with propane.
got another question. This relates to that alternative fuel tax credit. So Broward County is a tax exempt entity, right? So how exactly did you benefit from that? What were the ins and outs of that?
Well, it's not a, maybe it's probably not called, it's the alternative fuel credit. It's not a tax. It's not like I paid an excise tax because I am tax exempt. This is a credit that you get back for every gallon. It doesn't matter how much you paid for it. It's not based on the price you paid. It's on gallon consumption. You get a credit back. It was 50 cents per gallon. And then I believe in 2021, they lowered it to 36 cents per gasoline equivalent. And so they've, like I said, they've reauthorized it each year. Sometimes it's been retroactive authorized, but 2022 is already been approved. So basically I just submit this IRS form and it's, I can send the information if you want. You just put it in, say, okay, you know, I had 1 million gallons this year. They do the calculation, it's right on the form. And there's $300,000, $400,000, $500,000 coming back to you.
Any more questions out there?
I have a question, Paul. This is Rachel. I wonder what it costs to train the mechanics to go from fuel to propane. Is it a lot of training or difficult?
No, it really isn't. Roush and ICOM come down and do it. Even your warranty shop, the local Ford guys, you know, when they hear propane, they didn't want to touch it originally, but they'll come down and train all those guys for you. It's minimal, really. You wouldn't know if you lift the hood up that it's a propane injection system. Everything else is the same. The codes are the same on a Roush in the computer that are going to tell you if there's an issue. So there really isn't a lot of training. I think the book is like 10 pages total, and it's mostly on just like PM stuff for the filters and things. So there's no special training per se for somebody that's used to working on a gasoline or diesel engine.
Okay, thank you.
Paul, are you seeing anything coming out of the infrastructure bill I know it emphasizes electric a lot, but are you seeing anything coming out of the infrastructure bill that you think is gonna help you with your fleet?
Yeah, I do see propane is included in the infrastructure bill language that I've seen for infrastructure going forward. And so we're talking about maybe adding a few more stations that we actually will pay for versus negotiating it with AmeriGas. We're not sure yet on that. I'm looking at building maybe bigger stations. The local ordinance here in Broward County, and that's something again as part of that infrastructure and in the fears and misconceptions. You got to look at what your local limits are on propane tanks. You may have a local ordinance that you want to look at. For us, as long as it's under 2,000 gallons, you're okay. But when you start to go up, you start to become like distributor size. When you go to, let's say, a 10,000 gallon tank, and there's certain rules on the footprint. If you stay under 2,000, you got to be 25 feet from any building or electric spark source. If you go to 10,000, it's 50 feet. So there's some rules and regulations that you got to look at. And so, with the size of my vehicle fleet right now, even though we've got multiple stations, AmeriGas is still fueling up once or twice a day. Because we're so close to one of their facilities, they'll just keep topping me off as their trucks return back to their facility. But at some point, I'd like to have maybe a 30,000 gallon tank on property. So that gets me a couple of days, and it kind of slows down their need to keep refilling. And so that's something also we're talking with some of our regulators here in Broward about their concerns on tank facilities if it's in a dense area, making sure they're comfortable with where we put our tanks. So
when you decided to do a propane at the beginning, did you have to involve elected officials, or the decision was more, the transit agency making the decision about moving to propane?
We made the decision that we wanted to do it as a policy, but we did need to seek our commission's approval for the purchase of the vehicles. Obviously they're approving the contract to piggyback and buy the vehicles. And we had to explain that they were more expensive due to the propane upfit in that first purchase, as well as approving the AmeriGas bid back in 2014 so that we could have the stations ready when the vehicles arrived. But in my briefings with each of those commissioners, again, weighing out all the positive aspects of what I anticipated, and I was winging it because it was a pull. We didn't go gradually. We went 100% propane. That first 138 buses, that was the size of my fleet that year. So we went 100% gasoline on December 31st to 100% propane on January 1st. And so I did have to convince my director, get him behind it, and then brief each of the commissioners and my county administrator that this was going to benefit us long term. Get my environmental folks, my resiliency officer, Dr. Gerardo down here in Broward, to let her know what we were doing so that she'd support it. And so, yeah, it took some legwork to make sure everybody was comfortable with it. And the fire didn't help 2 weeks before go live. So.
You covered a lot of territory, Paul. Any last questions for Paul? Are we running out of questions? Okay, that's fine.
How about baseball labor negotiations? No? All right.
Yeah, we're missing spring training, aren't we?
Yes.
Paul, it was really a great presentation. You did touch on so many things. It does seem like a really strong solution in the right situation. So I'm glad that everyone was able to hear what you had to say. I'm guessing you wouldn't be opposed to have follow-up questions from any of these folks who are your peers in the industry.
No, I'm always open to answer questions. So my email's on the meeting. Don't hesitate if something pops up you want to ask. I've developed a lot of really good sources of information in the industry that if you want to hear it from somebody else other than me, I can get you folks from like the Propane Research Education Council in Washington, D.C. They've got case study after case study in different aspects, not just transit. I'm paratransit, but some of the other folks are mail delivery, the post office, the vendors that the post office uses to move mail between facilities are going propane. Food truck industries going to propane. So there's other usages just beyond transit. AmeriGas, Roush, ICOM, Suburban. Talk to them too. I mean, they'll tell you what they can do. The folks at FDOT are great. I'm not the only propane user off the state contract. Palm Trans using them. They've got a bunch. I know Lee Trans got a bunch on the West Coast. So again, that small uptick, unfortunately, because of the delay, none of you have the availability to the Florida program that was in place when I bought my buses. The agricultural division had a rebate program that you got 50% of the upfit back. They had a $6 million grant that ran for 3 years, I believe it was. And private and public could apply for it. And so for the 17 grand I paid for that upfit for those first 138 buses, I was able to get 8,500 back in a rebate from the state before applying for the fuel rebate from the Fed. So unfortunately that stopped being funded after 3 years. And I continue in my legislative push every year to try to get that put back in. Because I think it would have benefited. We saw even some taxi operators down here in Broward went out and retrofitted some of their vehicles because they were able to get the rebate and help fund that. So I don't know if you guys have stronger lobbyists than I do. Maybe they can put that in next year's legislative
I
budget.
was going to say, Paul, we were definitely in the congressional leaders' ears last week. Me and Marcy, we participated in Capitol Hill Week for transportation. So we did mention as far as for the incentives, rebates, also to include an extra additional 150 million for the DERA funded projects as well. So we're trying to get as much money as we can for the state of Florida. We're definitely trying.
But I do think the infrastructure bill, like I said, I saw propane specifically identified in the infrastructure bill as well as electric. So
Electric just has a little bit more, but unfortunately it's because, like you're saying, it's a new technology. So a lot of people are, trying to convert, but I do believe, like Paul mentioned, the numbers do speak for themselves. And renewable park does have this case studies, and it actually shows that you actually are reducing. It's a negative number for GHGs as opposed to just only a certain amount or not doing anything. So just another food for thought for sustainability. And if you guys are putting together like a climate action plan, so it's definitely a good field to consider.
Yeah, I have one last question for Paul. Paul, knowing what you know now after 5 or 6 years of using propane, if you have to go back to the beginning, is there anything that you will do different?
I probably would have included the additional stations I put in later on. I started with just the 2 stations at the garages of my vendors. And, again, for Paratransit, because I contract out, I had a First Transit facility that they owned. And part of my operating budget, my operating contract with First Transit and my other vendor, Transportation America, it included language for facility requirements. Whatever facility they proposed in that contract had to have space for a certain footprint of tanks. So I kind of just focused on getting those tanks up and running first. I wish that I had included the facilities I'm installing now across on other county properties to enhance the range of my vehicles. And again, my original fleet vehicles came with a 41-gallon tank. I wish I had pushed for a bigger tank we changed our operating parameters for the shorter range, a lot like what people do with electric vehicles. So instead of getting a 300-mile range, I accepted a 225. And I wish I had pushed for the 300 range. It just would have made life easier for us in that first year of changing how we did things.
I guess when you are doing a project for the first time, the first year, the first couple of years, when you learn, you know, some of those things that, you know. But all in all, I congratulate you. It's a fantastic operation that you have there.
Oh, there's no regrets. I'll tell you. I mean, I just wish maybe tweak here, but there's absolutely no regrets that we did this.
Yeah.
Every time, and my director just retired last Friday, but every time he's out and he's talking about it, he always touts, we've got one of the largest propane fleets on the East Coast for paratransit vehicles. The savings that we've been able to put in place, saving taxpayer dollars. I'm already the most expensive per passenger service that the transit department runs. So anything that we can do to help offset that mitigation of growth and cost has benefited. So, you know, it was pretty easy decision for me on the return on investment.
Yeah. Awesome. Thank you so much for all that information, Paul.
My pleasure.
Yes, thanks, Paul. Thanks everyone for attending. We did record this session in case you'd like it for reference. Let me know. I'll make sure you get a copy of it. Keep the communication going with Elizabeth or myself. Like Elizabeth said at the beginning, we want to see a project here in North Florida. If you're interested in one, don't forget the North Florida TPO and the Clean Fuels Coalition as a partner.
Thank you.
With that, I'll adjourn the meeting. Thanks again, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you. Have a
Bye,
great
everybody.
day.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.